with that, let me just talk a little bit about STEMX. So STEMX is a multi-network a network of multi-state STEM networks developed for states by states. It's a grassroots movement that provides an accessible platform to share, analyze, and disseminate quality STEM education tools to transform education, expand the number of STEM teachers, increase student achievement in STEM, and to grow tomorrow's innovators. We are currently at 19 members. We have 17 statewide networks, a DC network, and a network within Guam. So, if you're interested in learning more about the network, you can always go to our website, which is stemx.us. And today, we have two speakers coming to you live from DC. We have James Brown, who is the Executive Director of the STEM Education Coalition, which is an alliance of over more than 500 businesses, professionals, and education organizations that work to raise awareness in Congress, the administration, and other organizations about the critical role that STEM education plays in enabling the U.S. to remain the economic and technological leader of the global marketplace in this 21st century. In addition, we have Jody Peterson, who is the Assistant Executive Director for Legislative and Public Affairs for the National Science Teachers Association. She's responsible for monitoring and identifying public and policy and legislation affecting science education on Capitol Hill. And she's also responsible for all outreach activities to Congress and the association's advocacy initiatives. So with that, why don't I turn it over to James to launch us into the webinar today.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity to be on, and thanks to everybody in STEMX for everything that you're doing. We followed with great interest the development and the evolution of STEMX, and are happy to count Battelle as one of our members, and I know many of your organizations. I saw a number of familiar faces and names as I was scanning through them today, so happy to be with friends and to talk about something that I think is of great interest to us all. So just a little bit to start off about who we are. So as Michael mentioned, the STEM Education Coalition is an alliance of business, education, and professional organizations, and we've focused a great deal on the legislation that we're talking about over the last year, trying to make it as strong on STEM education as possible. Obviously, we think the law is a move in the right direction compared to No Child Left Behind. But I think what will characterize all of our dealings with this law over the next probably 10 to 15 years, I would guess, is the shift in decision-making and in priority setting from the federal government to state governments about budgets, accountability, a whole host of other issues. And one of the things that we're trying to do as a large coalition, we have a lot of our members are nationwide and in all of your states, and are grappling with the reality of what does this law mean for us in our state, in our district, and for our organizations in those places, and how do we take advantage of some of the new authorities and new resources that will be available around STEM to try and really advance the issue. And I think there's great potential in leveraging this law to improve STEM education across the country, but it's a very different challenge than we've dealt with over the past 10 years or so, in the sense that STEM has been both a national and a state priority. And I think that the challenge that we have as a national organization is trying to figure out how we can better work with you at the state level, and how our members can work with you at the state level to help and take advantage of some of the authorities in the new law and to help advance the issue on that front. Because I think there's a lot of work still to be done in Washington, but the lion's share of what will improve STEM education over the next 10 years is obviously going to play out at an increasing pace at the state level. So for us as an organization, I think we want to offer our assistance and the assistance of our members in, daycare, and the assistance of our members in being involved and being helpful to you at the state level where we can, and helping to get them into state capitals and into governor's offices and into state departments where it's appropriate or where it's useful to the folks on the ground out there, and also get a sense from you of how it's going, Where do you see your state going under this new law, and what are those implications, and really what are the pressure points? Because I think we're going to see a lot of changes and a lot of acceleration potentially in what's going on in the STEM arena, and we want to position ourselves to be both an asset to you and also help drive change where we can. So what we wanted to do today was talk a little bit about the law, and then get a lot of feedback and hopefully have some good back and forth discussion on what you think, what you see, and where we can be helpful as national organizations. So at this point, Jody, I'll turn it over to you, and you can talk about the baby and what's going to happen next.
The baby. Okay, thanks, James. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go rather quickly through some of the basic outlines, the key points of the law. And then I'm going to do a little bit deeper dive into the STEM points of the law, because I know that's what the main event is, and that's why everyone's here. And let me say again, thank you for inviting us. NSTA has always been very active, on the Hill. And now with this shift to the state authority, we're looking forward to partnerships with STEMX states and working with our advocates. We have state organizations in practically every state of teachers that are really excited about the new law, and working with some of the science supervisors in the states on coming together on how we can make advocacy for STEM at the state level a reality, instead of, we're all just talking about it and what to do. So I know that's a big conversation for us at the national level. I know hopefully it's a big conversation, or it will be a conversation in your states as well. So let me just go over some broad points of the law. The first one is standards. And this was in the original No Child Left Behind. All states have to maintain challenging standards in math, language arts, and science. That hasn't changed at all, which is probably a good indicator and a good sign, because next gen science standards are coming up in a lot of states. As you know, I think we're in 14 states right now. The next big point is testing. That too has not changed from the original law. Reading and math have to be tested once annually between grades 3 through 8. And science, again, has to be tested once in elementary, once in middle, and once in high school. And the state can decide when they want to do that. Schools and states have to report out their scores for these students by whole school. You can bring up the next point. By whole school. And they can also do subgroups as well. They have to maintain the subgroup reporting. And this hasn't changed. They report by subgroups of race, by poverty, ELL students, students with disabilities, and by gender. Okay, so now this is where the law changes a little bit, actually a lot, is the fact that the authority now is going back to the states in a lot of areas, specifically for accountability. The new law eliminates AYP, which I'm sure you have probably heard by now, which means the one-size-fits-all federal mandate that said that the school had to meet these specific standards or they would be counted as failing. That is no longer applicable. The schools still have to report out the score, but now they can do their own, the states are now responsible for developing their own accountability systems. They have to use multiple measures, which means they can decide the measures they can use. I think they have to use graduation rates as one of them, but the states can decide how they're going to keep their, the accountability systems they're going to use, how they're going to measure the gaps between student outcomes, and they're responsible for the overall quality of student outcomes and instruction. So this is a huge change. This was a big push in Washington to have this happen, and it is happening. The states are still required, however, to turn around the bottom 5% of their schools. Before that, was the Department of Education was very active in that. They still will be to an extent, but it's basically a state mandate now that they have to be responsible in the manner that they see fit to turn around those schools. Another big change, and this is the big one that really affects STEM education probably the most, is that the new federal law eliminates 40 federal programs, including the Math and Science Partnership Program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It eliminates these and consolidates the programs into a block grant, which is now the Title II-A Teacher Leader Quality Grant. Okay, we tried very hard to maintain the dedicated funds for science and math. We were very successful in getting STEM in the language throughout the bill. However, the bill does consolidate the Math Science Partnership Program and other programs, and gives the discretion to the states how to use the funds. They have the flexibility to determine how they're used, and I'm going to get into the uses in a few minutes. But it's important to understand that the states will have the authority to use this, and the districts and states can transfer these funds under Title II into Title I programs if they so wish. Title I is, as you know, is the big federal grant for low-income, low-performing schools. So that's important to remember that. As far as teachers are concerned, the new federal law eliminates the requirement that states, this was a requirement under the waivers that Secretary Duncan was providing to the states. They no longer have to do teacher evaluation systems. However, if the state wants to maintain a teacher evaluation system or develop one, they can do that. But it's no longer a federal requirement. And probably the biggest change too as well, and this is the highlights, are the federal authority has been restricted in this bill. The Secretary of Education can no longer interfere in any kind of state accountability, whereas before they would have to get permission from the Department of Education on certain state accountability measures or whatever. Now the federal government is completely out of that. The federal government, i.e. the Secretary of Education or Department of Education, cannot mandate any or incentivize any states to adopt or maintain standards, which was a large argument with Race to the Top funding and getting Common Core going and all that good stuff. So I think these are the big highlights of the bill, and then we're going to go real quickly into the STEM pieces. But as you can see, the takeaway here is that the state departments are going to be given a lot more authority and have more decision-making on federal programs that were once kind of oversaw by the Department of Education. Education Week, if you have a subscription to that or not, they had a great article yesterday on some of the challenges facing state departments of education. As you know, there's been cutbacks there. They're not operating on full employment, and if you work with the states, and we work with the states a lot, they're in different, there's different variations of capability there as far as STEM is concerned. So, that's another issue we're looking at as well, which hopefully, STEMX can help us do that. So the big question, after going over the broad pieces of the bill, is how STEM is going to fare in the new legislation. So to go into the STEM specific areas in the bill, one of the big things that we were very happy about is that STEM testing, standards are required for math and science, but science testing is also continued in this legislation. This is a big push not only for NSTA, but the entire STEMIC coalition, because it was at one point not in the House bill. We need to maintain that testing to ensure that science is continued actually to be taught in some of the elementary grades. We noticed that when the first bill came around and there was so much focus on accountability with math and language arts, that elementary teachers were telling us that it was just not being taught in the early grades, K-6. So we're seeing, I think that's changing a little bit. Actually, I think it's changing a lot. So we're very happy that science testing continues. As I mentioned before, the Math Science Partnership was eliminated. It went to the Title II grants. STEM is, there's a long list of allowable uses of funds that the state can use for this grant. It supports professional development for teachers, teacher recruitment and retention, class size reduction. There's a big push to do more alternative certification for teachers with the new funds. Differential pay is also a use of funds. And a big push is to integrate career and technical education into instruction. So there's a lot of allowable uses, and again, STEM is one of them. And we're hoping that because the set-aside, or because this targeted funding that went to the states under Title IIB is no longer available, that states will realize that they need funding for STEM. So that's going to be a big push very soon. The funding structure is similar to No Child Left Behind. Every state will get Title IIA funds based on a formula that includes low-income schools and school-age population. And then 95% of the funds that states get have to go to competitive grants to the LEAs. So that's similar to the current program. That funding structure is still in place, but the states have a lot more decisive, or have a lot more say in how the funds will be dispersed.
Jody, I'm just going to check you on that acronym there, just in case we've got somebody new to the LEA.
Oh, LEAs, I'm sorry. Local education, LEAs is local education agency. Districts, it means a district.
Great.
And the SEA, if I refer to SEA, it's state education agency, which is basically the Department of Education. Okay. So that's Title II A. And then the second big program that we're really excited about is the Title IV grants. And what this was is it's a continuation, or it's actually a adaptation of the 21st Century Community Learning Grants, which was largely the after-school programs. Basically, they rejiggered it, and now these formula grants would go to LEAs, go to states based on their Title I formula, okay? And then states would provide 95% of these grants, again, to LEAs who are going to write competitive bids for these programs. Now, the change in this program is that STEM is mentioned, or is also an allowable use of funds, but it's very prominent in some of these grant programs. So each LEA would receive literally a minimum of $10,000 under this program. LEA is a district. And districts, based on their Title I funding, could receive up to $30,000. So, but there will be more funding here available. The authorized amount is like $1.65 billion for this grant alone. So what the law says is that when the districts that get this money, they have to use at least 20% of their funding to support students and well-rounded education, 20% for safe and healthy schools, and 20% or in some other funding for technology. In the first pot, which goes towards a well-rounded education, there's a huge list of ways that districts can use this funding, and that includes to expand STEM courses, pay for student participation in STEM competitions, like robotics and your out-of-school competitions that are very popular now, provide hands-on learning opportunities in STEM, integrate classroom-based and informal and after-school STEM into the school or district, expand or create STEM specialty schools, and there's a definition for that too in the legislation. I'll get to that in a minute, and expand environmental education. So while there is, the MSPs are gone and that targeted funding is no longer going to other states, this is a wider pool of districts and states that can take advantage of funding in these two grant programs through the new law, if the state authority is there and the state will is there, that we believe will expand STEM activities.
Jody, I'm going to try to parse that a little bit, but we've got a question that came in, and I think it's worth going through. Jenny wanted to know, do the grants, are they required, and I think you sort of touched on this, but it's in it. Do the grants have to go to the LEAs, the local educational groups?
Yes.
Or do they go to institutes of higher education?
The LEAs, okay, so the Title IIA, nonprofits can be involved in that. 95% have to disperse 95% of those grants, but higher education and nonprofits can be a partner in those grants.
Well, and the other thing I'd add, Jody, is that those are competitions at the state level amongst LEAs or partnerships with LEAs. The LEA has to be involved in most cases. It would be unusual for a substantial part of that money to flow just to nonprofits if they didn't have a school partner.
I think it's a requirement.
But it'll be a competition at the state level, so everybody will be competing for those state funds.
And then, Jody, can you just walk us through maybe a little more slowly the 20% rule there? Because that seemed like a really important point. And
so Title IV is divided into, let's say, 3 pots. And the state will get the money, and then again, they have to make competitive grants to both districts and districts in their state. They have to spend 20% of that on their grant for activities to support a well-rounded education. And there's a list of activities that they can use for that, okay? They have to use 20% for activities to support safe and healthy students. And they have to use also funds for one or more activities to support the effective use of technology. And I don't think there's a percentage on that, but there's some language that they encourage the technology. So for the allowable use of funds to support a well-rounded education for students, because it's called the Student Success Grant, is funding for STEM activities that include paying for competitions, paying for, integrating after-school programs into the K-12, integrating classroom-based and informal STEM, creating or expanding STEM specialty schools, paying for student participation. I'm sorry, I said that one. Provide hands-on learning opportunities. There's a lot of out of the school participation that would be that new things, really new STEM activities that this funding would be available for.
No, and I think that's really important to note too, is this new Title IV grant program will be new money in most states.
Right. Does that make sense? Any other question? So let me get on to the STEM specialty schools, because I know that this is probably of interest to a lot of you on the line or on the webinar. They did define a STEM specialty school because one of the uses of funds under the new Title IV said that the districts can expand or start a STEM specialty school. And it defines a STEM specialty school as a school or dedicated program within a school that engages students in rigorous, relevant, and integrated learning experiences focused on STEM, including computer science, and which include authentic school-wide research. So this is a new opportunity to develop programs if the will is there to develop these STEM specialty focused schools within a district or within a school itself. So we think this is a great opportunity for that program as well. And finally, under the new bill, there is a national program, and national is that the Secretary would award competitive grants to states, and it's a small amount to begin with, so it would be a few states, to develop STEM Master Teacher Corps. Okay, and this includes states would be responsible for recognizing, rewarding, attracting, and retaining outstanding STEM teachers. So the funding would be there to include stipends and additional funding for recognizing these teachers, providing training for them, creating leaders with them within the state. And that was a big priority for Senator Franken. This is basically his bill, or his language that he got in this final bill. And we're looking forward to developing that in the states as well when that competition begins. Okay. So the next slide I have is a timeline, the next PowerPoint is a timeline, which basically thanks to my friends at ASCD for providing this. And it just shows the process right now with the reauthorization. The two big dates to remember is August, the waivers are no longer valid, and next September, they think this law will be in effect at the beginning of the 2017-2018 school year.
So, Jody, just a quick question that came back through on the discussion from before about the scale of the Master Teachers Corps.
Yep.
How much funding do you think will go out for that, or how many teachers do you think states should be thinking about having within their core? Is any of that even laid out yet?
No, that isn't laid out yet. And the funding it's a certain percentage. Right now it's a small percentage of the overall funding. And again, you have to realize that these are authorized levels of what they say should be in the program, and the appropriation levels are different. So I really don't know how much is in there. It's a small, I would anticipate that only a few states would be able to, it would provide funding for only a few states to start with until we can expand the program.
Yeah, what I'd add to that, Michael, is that we'll probably know something. The earliest we could know something, and I doubt very much this will be in there, is the administration's going to put out a budget in February. I'd be surprised if their budget completely is aligned with the new law, although parts of it might be. The real acid test for that will be what happens in the first appropriations bill that's passed next year, is my guess. And I think it's reasonable for us to shoot for maybe $10 or $15 million in a national competition the first time around. I think that's certainly possible, which might lend itself to master teacher corps in perhaps 2, 3, 4 states. I mean, I think the floor on doing a statewide master teacher corps is something like at least several dozen, if not a couple of hundred teachers, and you'd start multiplying that by a few $1,000s a teacher, and that gives you some idea of what it might cost. So, I think it's reasonable that we might have 2 or 3 states in a program like that at any given time.
Yeah. So it's just following up on that and a question that just came in, and so it sounds like they're really looking for an organized program for the Master Teacher Corps, more than just kind of recognition of teachers that are doing good things, like you do with the the Presidential Awards for Science and Math Teachers. I can never say the acronym right.
Yeah, similar to that, I think. That's a good analogy.
So you think it'll be similar to that, or do you think they're looking for something a bit more?
I don't know what, I really can't tell you. I mean, we could look at legislative language, and it's and I just really read it to you. It says it's very broad. I mean, it's how they're going to develop the program. Obviously, we're going to, have some input into that, but I can't tell you exactly, what it's going to look like. They're just recognize, reward, attract, and retain outstanding STEM teachers in the field, and basically empower them so they can provide training to other teachers in the state, that kind of thing. Training the trainers, state leadership. There's also the language, and if a state decides that they don't want to do a STEM Master Teacher Corps, because the competition is also to provide training, professional development training to STEM teachers throughout the state. So that's an option as well.
Mm-hmm. So it does sound a bit more involved than what goes on with the presidential awardees, although it sounds like there's a lot of flexibility for the states to figure out what it will mean for them.
Yeah.
No, and one of the components, Michael, is, the original proposals around Master Teacher Corps were annual compensation for teachers and the organization of statewide networks. I mean, that's the legislative intent that's behind this, but I think Jody's right on when she says, this is going to be the devil in the details. And this is there are half a dozen national initiatives that would be competitions the Secretary would govern in this bill, and this is one of them. So this is the STEM component there, and I think our community is going to have a role in shaping it and figuring out exactly what it looks like, because in order to get funding from Congress for it, it's going to have the support of our community. So we're going to have a voice in figuring out what that looks like.
Yeah. And so it sounds like there's potentially a lot of flexibility across all of the areas where STEM can be focused, where states may pick up that opportunity to have STEM be part of their plans going forward, where other states may downplay STEM and what they're doing going forward.
Well, I definitely think that's the right way to look at it, Michael. I think there's going to be a spectrum of reactions to this, in the sense that, we're going to start learning. The states are going to put together plans on this in the next 6 months, say. You'll start to see details flowing out of the states as to what they're going to do in response. But really, we won't know a lot of firm details as to what's happening until sometime next year, when the states really get close to implementing, the full implementation of this law. And I think for us, as the community, the national organizations, I think this year is going to be about figuring out what state directions are, and next year is going to be about figuring out how to adjust and how to advocate for things where we see there are needs or opportunities. Because, I think everybody's scrambling to figure out what all this means. And I think that the future is first about figuring out sort of what our intelligence network looks like on where we think there are opportunities and where the states are going. Because I think everybody is looking at this law with a great degree of optimism about what might happen, what's possible. But then again, the states have their own needs that they're going to apply to this, now in real time in complying with the law. And we'll be adjusting over time as we find out what those real plans are.
And that's it. Basically, that's the highlights. And it's if you have any more questions, if not, I'll toss it back to James.
we can walk through that timeline in a little bit more detail. We do have plenty of time if there's some really valuable things there. James, before we jump off the this big slide here, the kind of overview, I was really interested. You were talking about sort of what they do now. What is the big, if you're running a state organization or you're involved in a state organization like, we're closely here at Patel, we're closely aligned with the Ohio STEM Learning Network. Like, what is the thing that we should be really focusing on right now?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's gonna be different everywhere. But I think there will be so within the next 60 to 90 days, the Department of Education will finalize guidance by basically the beginning of the summer, saying here's what states are required to submit as the first round of compliance with the law. And I think it makes great sense for groups like the members of STEMX to be looking for the first round of state submissions. And between now and then, there will probably be opportunities for public comment and public feedback into that process. To the extent that you're in contact with the governor's offices and the state science and math supervisors and people like that, I would certainly think it would be forward thinking to check in with them and say, all right, we've heard there's a lot of opportunities in this law for STEM related activities. What are you thinking? And what do those plans look like? Because I don't think we'll have a lot of time to react to the first round of inputs into this process, because the states are going to be moving very quickly to comply with the law. But I think to the extent that we can learn what those things look like early on, I think it'll make great sense, because what we've gone through today is like 5 or 10% of the burden on states to deal with a whole new law, right? There are new rules for special ed, there's new rules for school safety, there's new rules for physical activity and the like, and the schools are having to adapt with everything at once. And I'm not sure in some states STEM may be really high on the radar screen, but I think for a lot of states, STEM is quite possibly an afterthought in this first round of conversations. So it makes a lot of sense for groups like the STEMX members to be now sort of making an informed check-in with your folks in the state education department and in governor's offices and your folks in the legislature to let them know, hey, are you paying attention to what can be done in STEM? And we've got some good fact sheets. The stuff that Jody talked about, in summarizing the bill, we've got in fact sheet form that we can get out to you and look for things like that from us so we can be helpful.
So I think we've got 2 questions. Mike, if you can walk through Noah's, and then
Sure.
Carolyn was hoping to work through the timeline and a little bit slower. And I would love to do that because I spent time on that slide.
Sounds good. So, Noah, our colleague from out in Colorado, was interested a little bit more in, the connection with the LEA. So he's curious about, will all of or most of the state grants be run through LEAs, or was this just for the Title IV portion in particular? And he also wanted to know if the connection to LEAs applied to Title II funds as well.
Yes.
Or whether, other not-for-profits, institutes of higher education are allowed to take the lead on those proposals, or if they're only able to be collaborators going forward.
So the Title II, I have the actual funding formula. Okay. So Title II, the formula funds are based on school age population and income, and that money goes directly to the states based on those two. And 95, the state keeps, 5% for, there's actually a list of state activities, and then 95% go as sub-grants / competitive grants to the LEAs. Nonprofits are welcome as partners as well. It's in the language. Now, I'm going to get, I think with a lot of this Title IIA money, that most of the fiduciary partners or the leaders are nonprofits and higher education institutions. So yes, they're partners, and they will, work with the states and the LEAs to deliver whatever it is that the funding is to go for. The Title IV money is based on the title. It's based on a formula made to the states based on their share of Title 1A grants from the fiscal year, which is the low-income grant. States would have to allocate 95% of these to the funds to the LEAs, again, in subgrants. And it's a competition, and it would require states that or the districts that receive over 30,000 have to do a needs assessment. Lower funding does not, but they would apply to the states for this funds. And nonprofits are also allowed as partnerships in that grant funding.
So is it fair then, Jody, to, and maybe I'm completely misunderstanding this, is it fair to characterize the Title IIs as just sort of general cash going to districts for a lot of different things?
No. Well, it's flow through money to the states. The states have a percentage which they do state activities, and they do some training for teachers, and they can do, a lot of them do alternative certification or do some other kinds of big activities. And then states or districts compete for that money at the state level. It's not flow through. It's not just like they're not going to hand the cash to the districts. The districts have to have a plan in place. They have to say, it's very organized as to there are needs in our district. The legislation has an allowable use of funds. There must be 15 to 20 bullets on that list. Use of funds to promote STEM education in the districts and at the state level are included. So that's why there's so much flexibility, because the states and the districts can decide how they need to use those funds with the ultimate goal of increasing student achievement and reducing the gaps, achievement gaps between, high-risk students and other students as well. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, obviously.
Well, and the one thing I'd add to that is the interesting part about the equation is that, so the Title II grants are all about teachers and teacher quality related activities, right? So the school, you can imagine in the current way Title II funds are spent, the school is the major partner in that activity, even though universities are involved, because it's teacher prep, right? So universities, teacher professional development. So universities are involved in that, delivering that content and so forth, but the money flows from the school to the university to pay for that coursework and other things of that kind. The Title IV grants are new, and there's a much wider range of partners that you might envision, because the criterion in those grants is it can be nonprofits in a standalone capability if they have I believe the language says, a proven track record of providing services like school competitions and after-school activities and enrichment activities that might take place on school campuses. So I don't think we exactly know what that formula is going to be yet, and what the states are going to use as the criterion for judging who wins. It would surprise me a whole lot if there were a lot of nonprofits winning funds that didn't have strong partnerships with schools already. But at the same time, I think you're going to see a wider range of partners involved in those grants, and that was part of the intent of that part of the law, was to involve more community-oriented organizations in partnerships.
So I know that Carolyn wanted to walk through the timeline a little bit more. I'm just going to pop that up, and whoever knows it best can talk us through it.
Okay, so right now, can you put them all up? There you go. Up. Okay, so right now there's public meetings. Obviously, this is the 20th. They've had 2 public meetings on before they go to negotiated rulemaking. If you go on the Department of Education website, the deadline is tomorrow for input on some of these provisions in the law. They're looking at largely, they're going to have to negotiate a rulemaking and that whole process around Title I and supplement, not supplant provisions. So the rulemaking will start in January. The panel is formed later this month, meeting in February, March. OMB reviews the proposed language. It goes back to Congress. Then it goes out for public input, because that will be the final regs, obviously. Responses to final input, and then the rest of the timeline there looks at the assessment systems. The formula changes to ESSA formally end or formally begin, I guess, on July 1st, and August 1st of this year. All the waivers, all the provisions under the waivers will end for the states. They see the final regs published for the new law, and it takes effect at the start of the school year in 2017-18. Now, let me add too that these are not these are projected dates. Nobody knows exactly the day this is going to happen, but these are projected timelines.
And there's also probably stuff that's not here yet, right? I mean, who knows how this will evolve as it goes, right? I mean, that's a very good point, Jody, in that, this is a plan that hasn't run into, if you remember what the rollout of No Child Left Behind was, within 6 months, everybody was in the courts, right? I think that's optimistic, and I also think that there are going to be more. They will probably break this law up into different components for getting public feedback. Right now, all the focus is on Title I and the accountability conversation. But one of the things we're going to follow closely as a coalition are the development of these new grant programs and to what extent they actually do some of the things that we've advertised that they do, right? Because the department can go a lot of different ways. Sometimes the font size matters, right, in terms of them making judgments about, what's a priority. And part of our goal will be to make sure that the STEM stuff ends up being prominently, the optics of this really matter a great deal. So, I think it makes sense for us to have a two-way conversation with you as state groups as you start to see some of this and say, well, what would you do if this was what would you do if this was actually the guideline, right?
Yeah. So James, are there other things that the STEM Ed Coalition is planning to do that you want to make folks aware of? And are there other assets at the state level that's the STEM Ed Coalition is connected to, that we should be thinking about connecting to our STEMX members?
That's a great question, Michael. I have 3 questions I want to get the answers to, at the end of a year. If I had perfect information on what was going on, here are 3 questions our members have that I think the STEMX membership and your community would be really helpful. And that is, what's the best thing in every state that the governor can do to advance STEM under this law, that the State Department of Education can do, and that the state legislature can do? And, we've answered some of those questions around things like Common Core and next generation standards and episodic engagement at the state level when there might be a proposal in play. And I know your members have too, and, all over the place in the last several years. A lot of people are fighting fires around STEM. I think systematically, what would be incredibly valuable to us, we're knowing the answers to those questions, because we regularly get questions from our companies that have national footprints, the Microsofts and the Exxon Mobils and the Texas Instruments and the Intels and so forth say, my CEO is going in to meet with the governor of state X. What should we ask them for? And for many, many years, it's been difficult to have an ask that was really pointed at the state level, at that level, saying, what budget do I support or what activity do I support? Because the federal law had tied a lot of state hands about what do I spend money on with STEM versus other priorities. So now the states can make a lot of decisions about what they're going to do in terms of spending priorities. And the state spending priorities are now linked to federal spending priorities, because if I'm a governor and I'm going to use federal dollars for some set of activities, that changes my state budget situation in a lot of ways too. So now now there's going to be this really interesting back and forth. And we have a lot of companies that want to be engaged in this at the state level. We have a huge number of member societies. So, Jody's organization has got a huge number of teachers that want to find things to do at the state level that are helpful in concert with groups that are already engaged. The math teachers are the same way. The scientific and professional societies are all looking for those opportunities. And in our cumulative membership, we've got something like 2 million individuals that are members of our member organization. So that's a lot of people in each state that might be able to come to a town hall meeting, or some of them will file public comments on things. So one of the things that we would really like your help with is feeding us the information, the intelligence on what some of those things that are coming across your desks look like.
That's really helpful, James. It's exciting to hear, you're thinking on the legislation and kind of what the STEM Ed Coalition is doing moving forward. I'm curious if anyone on the line has started to think about how they might work to, move forward with informing the enacting of the legislation, if there are efforts underway or being planned to think about pushing for STEM within these state plans, or if folks, just have a question about, interacting with their state to support this effort, or if they have, good ideas about, what might be useful steps for their states to take on. I just got a comment from Jenny Hicks. She said they are working with the folks in Indiana in their state legislation to get funds to develop a network of STEM mentor teachers. Jenny, do you want to unmute yourself and just give a little bit of background about, what that process is and, what you're doing to move it forward?
Sure, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. The state, for the third year in a row, I guess, they've legislated funds specifically for STEM teacher recruitment and retention, and iSTEM was awarded $740,000 to pursue the creation of a STEM mentor teacher network. And we already have an existing network of teachers because we have some math science partnership funding and some improving teacher quality funding. And so we're going to leverage that funding to take existing STEM, we call them a variety of things, but they're lead STEM teachers that work with our grant participants to improve instructional practice. They provide professional development, and we're not really looking at a coaching model so much as a peer mentoring system. And so we just received that funding late last fall, and we're working with targeting 10 school districts across the state that are actually part of our Indiana Science Initiative already, to grow that and hopefully use that as a model for developing a STEM mentor teacher network.
That's great.
Fantastic. Are there other things going on that folks want to share? I see we have another message here. So is there an anticipated start date when the plans are due, when federal appropriations are anticipated? A range of dates is fine too. Do we have kind of a sense of when those things will be coming?
James?
Sure. No, what I was going to say was, I think the first thing you'll see is, so in around the end of April, 1st of May, like the start of the summer, I think you're going to see the first formal regulations coming out of the Department of Education that states are going to have an opportunity to comment on, and the public will have an opportunity to comment on. And I think, shortly thereafter, you're also, so that's one track. You're going to see the regulatory language that, will be approved by Congress and then out for public comment. I think that's the critical path, if you will, to implementing that law is something you'll see. So Congress will demand that, and that sort of forces the department to do it. So there's some feet being held to the fire on that particular question. And then I think also in the April-May timeframe, you're going to see the states start submitting their plans for assessment systems. That's the first thing the department will have an opportunity to review. And Jody hinted on this earlier. The pieces that will happen first in this implementation will all be about accountability. They will be about how the state plans to assess the tested subjects, how they plan to stack up their targets for student achievement, and what the balance of academic and non-academic factors are in those state accountability systems. And the way it will work back, sort of the back and forth between the federal government and the states, is the states are required to submit them. If they meet minimum requirements, the department has to accept them. So most of these decisions are going to be made at the state level, and the department will accept, I think the way this will play out is the department will accept most of those plans, and there may be a few states who push the limits, but I doubt that very much. I think the federal government's going to be in a position of blessing most of those state plans. And that's why I say, it's valuable for you at the state level to keep your ears to the ground and share with the STEMX partners and with us as national organizations the tidbits you're getting, because we can mobilize people to react to those things at the state level, but only if we have good information. I think, so my sense is, you will start seeing firm details from your states in the April-May timeframe for many of these things. And the second part of the question was on appropriations. So the federal budget for the fiscal year 2017 will come out on February 9th. That's the second Tuesday of February. That starts off the budget process for the next fiscal year. And, Congress has to finish that before the end of this fiscal year. And we have this thing called the election that's a nice, thing hanging over all this process for this summer. But, Congress will either do something to bridge that process before the August recess and before the election, or they'll deal with it in that transitionary period. And I doubt very much we'll see a lot of change in the federal appropriations process for this year. I mean, who knows what that will look like? The administration is going to have to make some choices in its budget about how much of this law they put in their new budget. And the budget officials in Washington are probably working long hours trying to figure that out. But based upon what that looks like, then Congress will be making decisions about implementing or appropriating those funds along the lines the administration proposes or not. And I'm not super optimistic that process will go smoothly, but it actually might, because I think there's a lot of enthusiasm in making this law work and making that part of the success story. But we'll see the first round of details in February for next year's budget, and then I think you'll see another big round of decisions made after the election and before the oath of office for the next president.
That's great. It's really helpful to have that information. Before I wrap up, I wanted to give Kelly a chance just to talk a little bit about what they're doing to move things forward within Kentucky.
Yeah, I had a little self-interest involved in tuning in today because we're facing a situation in Kentucky. I'm executive director for the ASTA, and we've seen since the economic downturn in 2008, professional development funds dropped by about 2/3 of what the state was providing to schools. And so as a result of that, there's a lot less, PD money available. So we've seen attendance at our annual conference, science education conference, go down as teachers just don't have the money to pay for attending. So one of the things we'll want to be pushing for is to see more of that Title II money. Hopefully there'd be more funds coming in, and then more of that be dedicated to STEM.
Right.
No, and that's music to our ears. I mean, I think that's, in Kentucky, you have a state superintendent who's really familiar with this conversation, right? So,
right.
So I think that, that's the kind of stuff we want to hear, and let us know if there's something we can do to reinforce that or be helpful. I mean, there are lots of people in the STEM world that want to get engaged in this at the state level now.
Okay.
So following on with that, I also heard from Carolyn King that they're part of the Governor's STEM Alliance and will be working with the governor to identify and enable leverage points and advocate, partner with their Department of Education. So it's to really prioritize STEM. So it sounds like they're already, moving forward and are working on the STEM Master Teachers core issue. So, we might be able to learn some from Caroline about the work that they're doing and, how that work is going. And so, as we come towards the end of our time here, Rob, can you give me control of the slides? What I'd like to do is kind of just wrap up and talk about, how we can potentially utilize this information that James and Jody have so eloquently laid out for us. There's a lot of work to be done here. And there's a lot of interest in continuing to move this work forward. So what we'd like to do as STEMX is, work with our network to figure out how we can best engage in the process, advocate for STEM where that's appropriate and we're able to, and make sure that STEM at least continues to be as much of a priority as it is within your state. If not, increase the amount of priority it really is. So, if you're outside of the STEMX network, or if you're in a state that, we're part of, and you'd like to connect to one of the leaders within a particular state, you can go to our website, and we actually put up a report recently that we have in digital form, and as part of that, you can request to be connected with one of the leaders in your state. And so if you do that, what we can do is hook you up with the leader in your state that we'll be working with to try to facilitate this interaction at the state level to ensure that STEM continues to be or is increasingly a priority within the education plan of your state. So we're really looking forward to working with you going forward. And also, if there are just general comments or questions that folks have, feel free to follow up with me. My email is federm@battelle.org. And, I'm more than happy to work with you on potential ideas to move this forward. And, we really think this is going to be a critical issue for the education of the students across the country. So we're really excited to have so many folks interested and engaged in this conversation. And, we wish, we hope that you all continue to work together to really do all that we can to do the best for our students. So, with that, I just want to thank James and Jody for putting this together for us, and for Rob for making sure that the technology actually worked, and for facilitating the conversation with me. It's really been great. And I look forward to hearing more from everyone in the near future. And one last note, we are recording this, and we're hoping to be able to post it to our website in the near future. And we will shoot you an email when it is available. So with that, thank you so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.